Misdiagnosis is possible, although there are quite significant overlaps between the two disorders, BPD and ADHD. And in this book that I've been talking about for Borderline Personality Awareness Month, Complex BPD by Dr. Daniel Fox, PhD, there's a chapter that specifically talks about BPD and ADHD and how to differentiate. So let's get into it. So this is from page 148, the ADHD BPD complexity. The overlap between BPD and ADHD is a complicated combination that poses many challenges for you and your treatment providers. ADHD is a neurodevelopmental disorder characterized by hallmark symptoms of inattention and hyperactivity/impulsivity. And as you know, BPD is characterized by erratic and dramatic responses to internal and external stimuli that occur across situations for extended periods of time. Approximately 4% of the general population meets criteria for ADHD, but it doesn't exist in isolation, as it's often comorbid with anxiety, depression, substance use, and personality disorders. It's estimated that 38% of individuals with BPD have comorbid ADHD, like myself. What we're calling complex BPD, CBPD in this book, and 14% of those diagnosed with ADHD in childhood are later diagnosed with BPD. As this data shows, ADHD and BPD occur together quite often, which adds to the difficulty in the identification and treatment for both yourself and the mental health providers you look to for help. Shelley's story illustrates ADHD symptoms very well and clearly. In most therapeutic sessions, the information is erratic and disorganized, causing their primary care physician, psychiatrist, or mental health provider to be overwhelmed. Perhaps you felt this way on more than one occasion. If everyone who's trying to provide treatment and understand the impetus for presentation of systems is overwhelmed, it's very difficult to make heads or tails of the connection and to the root of what's causing them. This significantly affects the ability to create a trajectory for successful treatment. If you've been diagnosed with ADHD, BPD, or possibly both, but you can't seem to identify which is present, how often, and under what conditions, you're not alone. There's a lot of confusion about the intersection and co-occurrence of BPD and ADHD that make up this type of complex borderline personality disorder. In adolescents and adults, it's difficult to distinguish because both disorders share similar surface content and features. The hallmarks of ADHD are inattentiveness and hyperactivity/impulsivity. These symptoms manifest to such a degree that they impair your ability to concentrate, take in new information, follow directions, and complete needed tasks. These issues are also seen in those with BPD. You're reading this book, or well, I'm reading it to you guys, likely because you experience some of them as well. You likely find it difficult to slow down enough to focus your attention, control your behavior, or just stop moving due to an intense need to get things done quickly or avoid perceived adverse events. Definitely true. Things in your life change so quickly, causing your mind to race and jump so that you end up not getting anything done, which leaves you emotionally dysregulated by your thoughts, feelings, and mental images. These cause you to engage in maladaptive patterns to try to lessen those thoughts, feelings, and images, but in the end, the patterns actually make things worse. Emotional dysregulation is associated with ADHD, but it's not a well-known byproduct of it like it is with BPD. Emotional dysregulation is an impaired ability to manage negative emotions such as fear, anger, and sadness. In ADHD, emotional dysregulation builds quickly but doesn't go over that line where it's destructive to the same degree that BPD does. For example, you're driven by your ADHD motor and your mind is wandering. Someone tells you that you forgot to do something very important and you feel sadness and regret because of it, but you're able to muster the energy to address and resolve the issue. This is somewhat similar in those with BPD, except the emotional dysregulation gets so intense and sometimes happens so quickly that they feel as though they're enveloped by it with nothing else to do but suffer through it until it passes. If it passes or explode, harming themselves or others or causing destruction in their life through other maladaptive means. In the example, you forgot something, the ensuing guilt and regret is so intense that you're unable to muster the energy to address and fix it, and instead you act out or are frozen by it. The degree of difference in symptoms is what makes this a very complex aspect of this type of complex borderline personality disorder. Low frustration tolerance and irritability are also overlapping symptoms of ADHD and BPD. These symptoms often work hand in hand to add to your difficulty in managing a wide variety of situations, whether they're related to work, school, or relationships. If you had ADHD alone, you'd experience your underlying low frustration tolerance and irritability as a secondary to inattentiveness and hyperactivity/impulsivity. Whereas if you had BPD alone, your irritability would intensely feed your low frustration tolerance, disrupting your ability to focus and concentrate on the issues you're contending with at any given time. When they occur jointly as complex BPD, they're much more prominent and difficult to control and often interfere with daily functioning, as well as in how you relate to others across a wide variety of relationship types, including intimate, platonic, and employment, in settings such as home, work, and public and private. For example, when you get bad news and you're triggered, your irritability and low frustrational tolerance gets mixed with your ADHD symptoms of inattentiveness and hyperactivity impulsivity. This increases the probability of you engaging in maladaptive patterns due to your impaired ability to take in all of this information, good and bad, related to the triggering event. Subsequently, you try to manage your emotional, cognitive, and behavioral response by engaging in those default maladaptive patterns. For example, an anger outburst or self-harm. That increased the probability of greater negative consequences, such as the loss of relationship, job, or friendship. Social intrusiveness and disorganization are also related to this type of complex BPD. Social intrusiveness routinely manifests as interrupting others, but it also can be seen as a component of social awkwardness that's related to a tendency to misinterpret the environment or how to appropriately socially engage with others. For example, the social intrusionness and awkwardness increase the likelihood that you'll experience rejection by others, which activates your issues of abandonment, which trigger the BPD part of complex BPD. This then becomes cyclical. Social intrusiveness leads to your awkward social engagements, which increase the probability of rejection, which triggers your abandonment, causing you to engage in your maladaptive patterns. This cycle continues for years until you or a qualified professional helps you see the pattern and you learn to stop it. Disorganization is highly disruptive to your mental health functioning. Disorganization adds to your sense of low efficacy, how well you feel you can engage in a required action to manage a situation, as your life often feels in disarray and outside your control. Disorganization drives your feelings of being continually uprooted that leads to your sensation of being bombarded by stressors in all directions. Making the ADHD and BPD distinction. These distinguishing symptoms aren't exhibited in a nicely ordered fashion, as you know. They're often presented when you encounter stress, fear, rejection, or any other triggering event or occurrence that activates your core content. Shelley's two stories show the added complexity when this type of complex borderline is present, but they also illustrate the critical aspects needed to discriminate between the two. History of aggressive behavior, paranoid ideation, episodes of dissociation, and being highly defensive to feedback are symptoms not often seen in those with ADHD but are common in those with BPD. Additional symptoms of distinction include past and present instances of self-harm, a tendency to exhibit a guarded presentation, wanting to be close but pushing others away, fear of disappointment from others, abandonment fears, feeling of emptiness, promiscuity to feel whole, and emotionally and physically intense relationships. You're at a higher likelihood to engage in these behaviors and exhibit these symptoms due to the internal turmoil you feel as a result of your BPD core content issues of abandonment and emptiness. All these symptoms and behaviors are often present and seen in those with BPD, but not in those with ADHD. These behaviors and symptoms, as they relate to your BPD, are often a part of your maladaptive patterns that result from your core content being activated when you're under intense stress. The final symptom related to your BPD, but not ADHD, is an unstable self-image. This symptom is unique to BPD and includes a sense of not knowing who you are and what you believe. I hope this was helpful, and I'll be sharing more from this chapter as it's very lengthy and in-depth.